Well, it's time now for French Connections. That's our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeminot. Today we're going to focus on the media landscape here in France, be it TV, radio, newspapers or magazines. France offers a wide selection of media options, but who do they belong to? And what impact does that actually have on the content that's offered to the public?
Well, France has a rich media landscape, to say the least, and there's a lot on offer. And if you want to take a kind of bird's eye view of what this media landscape looks like, you're in luck because each year the Le Monde Diplomatique publishes a map. You can see it here that shows just about every TV station, radio station, newspaper, and magazine, and also who they belong to. And you can't really see much here, but there's basically a mix of basically public companies and privately owned ones too. We're right up here. That's France 24. We belong to France Média Monde, which belongs to the French Republic because we're a public channel. And you can see all these other magazines and newspapers, etc. They often come back to these individuals right here, very rich individuals, a kind of small group of billionaires, usually men.
Well, as you say, a tricky kind of patchwork, of who owns what. It's not unusual, though, is it, Flo, in France for billionaires to own media organisations. And it has to be said, it's a trend that has almost increased over the last few years.
That's right, because these days around a dozen billionaires own or co-own most of the French media. So let's just look at like an example. Bernard Arnault, for instance, he's the richest man in France, and he made a fortune in luxury with brands like Louis Vuitton, with Hennessy, etc. And he owns several things. He owns the newspaper Les Echos, which focuses on business, Le Parisien, which is one of the most read dailies in France, as well as the radio station Radio Classique. You can see him here, Bernard Arnault. There are other examples too. For instance, the Dassault family. You can see them there. They made a fortune in aviation, and they own the conservative daily Le Figaro. I could go on, but you get the idea.
Very much so. I mean, perhaps a silly question, but walk us through why it is that the media is owned by such a small handful of people, if you will.
Well, there are a lot of factors at play, and of course, each media has a different story, but there's kind of a global arc. So let's take a look at a concrete example. Let's take a look at what happened to Le Monde. So Le Monde is widely regarded as kind of the reference when it comes to quality daily print journalism that people trust. Now, in the early 2000s, with the rise of the internet, people started consuming news differently. They basically stopped buying Le Monde newspaper and moved online. And so this led to a massive drop in sales, which eventually led to a collapse of their economic model.
Lorsque vous bénéficiez de moins en moins de lectorat, vous intéressez de moins en moins les annonceurs. En intéressant moins d'annonceurs, vous avez moins de recettes publicitaires et donc moins d'argent.
So less and less money is coming in, but even if you tighten the belt, there is kind of a certain cost that you just can't cut when it comes to producing quality journalism. So in came Xavier Niel, a billionaire who made a fortune in telecoms with the operator Free, along with another Czech billionaire, Daniel Krczynski, and a millionaire, Mathieu Pigues. And this trio basically saved Le Monde. But at the time, the staff working for Le Monde, they were really uneasy about what this ownership would mean.
Ce qui est important aujourd'hui, c'est que les repreneurs s'engagent sur un certain nombre de mécanismes qui permettent de garantir aux journalistes et au personnel du Monde que ces journaux ne deviendront pas des instruments, des outils au profit de quelques-uns.
Well, Flo, that's a major question. How much influence do these billionaires actually have on media organizations that they own themselves?
Well, people are increasingly sounding the alarm over what they see as an increasing infringement on the editorial independence of privately owned media. And a good example of this is the billionaire Vincent Bolloré. Now, before he turned his attention to media, he successfully ran and expanded his family firm, the Bolloré Group, which is an old industrial group, basically. And in the 2000s, he shifted his attention to communications, and he now controls a substantial portfolio through a group called Vivendi. So this includes historic names in France, like Canal+, the radio channel Europe 1, and Le Journal du Dimanche. So critics argue that his group is increasingly pushing a conservative editorial line. For instance, his rolling news channel, which is known as CNews, it used to be known as ITV. So this has been likened to the French version of Fox News. Now, listen to the late Christophe Deloire when he was Secretary General of Reporters Without Borders.
C'est une soirée de mobilisation pour résister au système B, au système Bolloré, qui, quand il rachète des médias, se comporte comme un ogre, les digère et les transforme en médias d'opinion, là où il y avait du journalisme. C'est un danger pour le journalisme, pour les rédactions, et c'est un danger plus largement pour la démocratie.
critics increasingly talk about something called la bollorisation des médias. This is our expression du jour. You probably have heard it if you follow media news here. So basically, this means that they accuse Bolloré of reshaping editorial lines, newsroom culture, and even the public debate by pushing his right-wing, conservative, nationalistic agenda and ideology to the forefront of TV, radio, and the press. Bolloré, meanwhile, he says that all he's doing is trying to help struggling media groups.
Personne n'a l'ambition ou l'intention ou l'erreur d'essayer de faire des chaînes d'opinion. Nous sommes là pour être sur la liberté de l'expression.
Well, Flo, never fear. There is an alternative to private media that's owned by billionaires, of course. Public media.
That's right. We can toot our own horn here for a second. Public broadcasters like France Média Monde, France Télévisions, Radio France, they continue to play a central role in news delivery. And interestingly, trust in public TV and radio remains higher than for private outlets. But we are facing our own problems. For instance, a few years ago, the government scrapped a television license that was a major part of our financing. And recently, there have been attempts to merge us all together into one big group. And this sparked a lot of opposition and strikes by journalists, including here at France 24, and raise questions about political influence in public broadcasting. Now, on top of that, our credibility is being attacked by right-wing media as well, and all this at a time when credibility in the media is already facing a major crisis. So more than ever, it's important to really defend the credibility of media in general, as well as pluralism and editorial independence.
Agree with you more, Flo. Thanks very much for walking us through this really complex tapestry of private-owned media, public media, and what it all stands for. To our viewers, that's all we have time for today's show. Be sure to check out previous episodes on our website, of course, at france24.com.